It was the spring of 1945. Nazi Germany had been crushed. Berlin was rubble. Hitler was dead. Across Europe, people were pouring into the streets, weeping with joy, kissing strangers. In London, Churchill addressed enormous crowds. In Washington, flashbulbs popped. In Moscow, Stalin smiled his cold, tight smile. And at the Elbe River in central Germany, something extraordinary was happening. American GIs and Soviet soldiers, men who had never met, men who couldn't speak each other's language, were embracing each other. They were sharing cigarettes, sharing whiskey, sharing vodka. The photographs from those days are extraordinary. Two armies coming from opposite ends of the earth, meeting in the middle of a shattered continent. It looked like the dawn of a new era. Patton looked at those photographs and felt sick. He had commanded the Third Army, the most devastating armored force ever assembled. He had driven his tanks through France, through Luxembourg, through the heart of Germany at a speed that left military historians speechless. No general in American history had covered more ground faster. His men worshipped him. His enemies feared him. And now Eisenhower was telling him to stop. Not just stop, step back. Let the Russians take Berlin. Let the Russians take Prague. Let the Russians have Eastern Europe. Patton erupted. He went to Eisenhower and he said things that a subordinate officer should never say to a supreme commander. He argued, pleaded, raged. He said they were handing the continent to Stalin on a silver platter. Eisenhower listened patiently. Then he told Patton no. The decision was final. Patton went back to his headquarters and wrote in his diary that night. His words were unvarnished. He called the Soviets savages. He called them a threat far worse than the one they had just defeated. He wrote that the American army was making a catastrophic mistake, one the world would spend the next 50 years paying for. Nobody wanted to hear it, but Patton kept saying it. The meeting near Linz, Austria, changed everything. The Soviets wanted to impress Patton. They knew his reputation. They knew what his tanks had done across Western Europe, and they wanted to send a message. So they arranged a military parade. Not just any parade, a massive, thundering column of Soviet military power. Thousands of infantry soldiers marching in lockstep, columns of heavy tanks rolling past, shaking the earth, Cossack cavalry, sabers gleaming, horses snorting, artillery pieces that looked capable of leveling entire cities. Patton stood and watched it all without blinking. Afterward, his aides asked what he thought of the display. He told them exactly what he thought. "The shabbiest collection of sons of bitches I have ever laid eyes on," he said. He dissected their discipline. He mocked their equipment. He compared their marching to a rabble. But there was something underneath the contempt, a grudging recognition that these men had survived 4 years of combat against the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, a theater of war so brutal it made the Western campaigns look like a training exercise. Patton didn't respect many people, but he respected toughness, and he knew the Red Army was tough, which made them dangerous, which was exactly the problem. After the parade came the banquet. The Soviets knew how to throw a celebration. Long tables sagged under the weight of food, bread, fish, caviar, roasted meats. Vodka bottles appeared endlessly, replaced the moment they were emptied. The senior officers sat at the head of the table, American generals on one side, Soviet generals on the other, and a wall of interpreters in between, furiously translating jokes and pleasantries back and forth. The Soviets loved toasts. It was a cultural ritual, almost sacred. You raised your glass, you honored someone, Stalin, Roosevelt, the fallen soldiers, you drank, and you repeated the process until either the vodka ran out or you couldn't stand up. Refusing a toast wasn't rudeness, it was an insult of the deepest kind. It was like throwing a man's outstretched hand back in his face.
Patton sat through the early rounds of toasts with the expression of a man enduring a root canal. Then came the moment. A high-ranking Soviet general, some accounts say it was Georgy Zhukov himself, the most celebrated commander in the Red Army, the man who had taken Berlin, rose from his chair. The room quieted. He lifted his glass and he turned toward Patton. He spoke in Russian, his voice warm, theatrical, generous. The interpreter leaned in and translated. He was toasting to Allied unity, to brotherhood between nations, to the bond forged in blood between the American and Soviet soldier. He was looking directly at Patton. He smiled. He raised his glass higher. Every eye in the room swung toward George Patton. Patton did not pick up his glass. He stood up slowly. He straightened to his full height. He looked across the table at the Soviet general with eyes like two chips of flint, and he spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the entire room. "I will not drink with you." The silence that followed was like a physical thing. You could feel it pressing on the walls. The interpreter stared at Patton. His face had gone the color of chalk. He had heard American generals be blunt before. He had never heard anything like this.
Patton wasn't finished. "I will not drink with you or any other Russian son of a bitch in this room." Someone dropped a fork. That was the only sound. The interpreter turned to Patton with something close to desperation in his eyes. "General," he whispered, "I cannot repeat those words." Patton fixed him with a stare that had made colonels faint. "You will repeat those words," he said quietly, "every single one, exactly as I said them." The interpreter turned back to the Soviet general. He translated. The room held its breath. The Soviet general listened. He looked at Patton. He looked at the interpreter. And then he began to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh, deep, genuine, the kind of laugh that fills a room. He slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. He leaned forward, and through the interpreter, he fired back his reply. He told Patton that he thought Patton was a son of a bitch, too. Patton listened to the translation. For the first time all evening, a smile crossed his face. He reached down, he picked up his glass. "Good," he said. "Now that we've been honest with each other, I'll drink to that." And they did. Two warriors, two enemies dressed as allies, drinking together not out of friendship, but out of the one thing they actually shared: respect for a man who didn't bother to lie. The story spread through both armies within days. Soldiers laughed, officers shook their heads, but Patton wasn't joking, and he wasn't done. In the weeks that followed, he proposed something that made Washington go pale with horror. He wanted to rearm surrendered German soldiers. He wanted to roll the German Wehrmacht into the Third Army, point them east, and drive the Red Army out of every country they had occupied. He told his officers they could push the Soviets all the way back to Moscow if they moved fast enough. He told them the alternative was a 50-year war fought in the shadows, a war without battles, without a front line, without a clear enemy. Eisenhower called it madness. The press called Patton a lunatic, a warmonger, a danger to the fragile peace. Eventually, Eisenhower had no choice. He stripped Patton of the Third Army, the command he had built, the force he had bled for, the army he considered his life's work. He gave Patton a desk, paperwork, obscurity. Patton told his aide it felt like being asked to sit down after winning the race. 3 months later, in December 1945, he was dead. A car accident outside Mannheim, a broken mech, sudden, strange, suspicious to some even today. But his prediction lived on. Within 3 years, the Iron Curtain had fallen across every country he had pointed to on his maps: Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, all of them swallowed whole.
Within 5 years, Americans were dying in Korea. Within 20, they were dying in Vietnam. The 50-year war he had described in 1945 played out almost exactly as he said it would. He was wrong about a lot of things. His politics were ugly. His temper was destructive. His plan to restart the war immediately would have been catastrophic. But at that dinner table in 1945, when a Soviet general raised a glass and asked him to pretend, Patton refused. In a room full of men performing diplomacy, one man told the truth, and he drank to it.